So good morning, and we are so excited that you are here at the Leadership Conference for 2022. So that is fantastic. It's great to see your faces. We are living in a time where we are more connected than ever. And that means that relationships and how we build and put together our networks are critical to our success. So I want to welcome Pirate alum Bennett Wall. He is an administrator with ECU Health, and he leads analytics, business intelligence, and data infrastructure strategy for health initiatives across ECU Health. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bennett. Bennett, thank you for joining us.
Oh, what a joy and a pleasure to be with you guys today, man. My name is Bennett Wall. I'm your Administrator of Population Health Analytics at the hospital. I'm here to talk about my journey and my leadership journey. And for you guys, I want to, the goal for this meeting today is I want you to go home with some tricks, some tips, some tools to be able to help build out your network and your relationships. I am a product of network and relationships. Can you guess what my undergrad degree is in? It's not forest management from NC State, graduated in 2000. But I want to talk to you about my journey because obviously I am not have a degree to go sit in pop health analytics strategy and drive that for the hospital, which is the 9th largest hospital, by the way, in the United States. A lot of people don't realize that. That's an over 1,000-bed hospital. Those types of hospitals are in inner city Manhattan, Houston, LA. We've got the 9th largest hospital in the United States sitting in your backyard over there. And the reason why that is because Eastern North Carolina does not have health care east of I-95, and so that is the hub. And so years ago, Brody came together, put an academic medical center, and made that one of the region's brightest stars across North Carolina. So anyways, that's enough about them. Let's talk about the journey, because it really is a journey. Again, I grew up in a little town right down the street called Tarboro. It's about 30 minutes from here. I don't know if many of you guys know where Tarboro is. I grew up in Tarboro, class of 93. Parents from the Carolina Telephone. That was the biggest industry there back in those days. And when I tell you my story, I want you guys to pay attention to the relationships that were the big pieces to where it is. It isn't about what I knew or whatever. I want you to pay particular attention to the relationships that I made along the way, because they were key pieces of the puzzle. And then afterwards, I want to go through some tips and tricks and some tools. I have some handouts that I'm going to hand out that you can take away, and I'm going to figure out how to use the HOA app and add that to my profile, so that anybody wants to go up there. I think it's called HOA, I can't remember it, I downloaded it. But we'll add that to there. So I want to get you guys these tips and tricks because they really are awesome. So again, I graduated in the class of 93, 120 some people, and I think I was like number 17 or 18, so I was barely in 20% of my graduating class. So my parents had saved up just enough money to put me through 4 years of college, and that's all they had, 40 grand. And back in the day, that's what it took, 10 grand a year to get you to college. He said, son, that's what I got, and that's what we're going to go to school with. And I said, okay. So I got into UNCW. I want to go be a marine biologist because I love fishing and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm going to go to UNC Wilmington and be a marine biologist. I went down there with a meal plan and a Jeep with no top. And I was like, man, this is life. And I got down there on campus. Campus was fabulous. It was a co-ed dorm, man. It was just awesome. And so everybody would get up and go to class, and I'd go out there and play beach volleyball and wait for everybody to get back out of class. Then we go to Johnny Mercer's Pier and drink beer until we go back and eat dinner at the dining hall. And it was great until by the time, fast forward 2 years from now, and I had a semester's worth of transfer credit. And so my dad looked down and says, hell no, I'm not paying for this anymore. And so he brings me back home. And so my dad brings me back home and says, I want you to know what it's like to work without a college education. You can make $30,000, $40,000 a year without a college education. So my dad was best friends with the asphalt superintendent from Barn Hill Contracting Company. His name was Big Larry. And so him and Big Larry got together, and he wanted me to learn what it was like to make $40,000 a year, because it's working 60 hours a week, making overtime, time and a half, and it was, I'd get up in the morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'd start standing in one spot, stopping the slow sign. And I stood there, and I would watch the sun come up and watch the sun go all the way down, and I stood in the same spot, stop, slow, stop, slow. And it was crazy, man, because you got to meet all walks of life. Danny Bridgers, I will never forget him. He was a guy that was the foreman for that group, and he'd come by there about 10 o'clock in the morning. He'd come by, he'd say, "Hey man, I'm going to the store, what do you want to drink?" And I said, "Sandra, I'm about to die." He said, "Give me $1. I ain't giving you no change." I was like, all right. I gave him $1. And he'd come back to me, and like I said, man, it's 100 degrees out there with asphalt and everything else. And he'd pull up to the side of my sign, and he'd say, and he'd sit there, and he'd have my drink in his hand, and then he'd roll it out, and he'd say, "Here you go." And right before he handed it to me, shake it up and hand it to me. And so I worked there for a whole summer, and about 2 weeks in, I told Dad, I said, "I'm going to go back to college." He said, "I'm not paying you to go back to a 4-year institution. I don't think you're ready." He said, "Now you can go to the community college and transfer, and we'll do that." Now, at that time, I knew I wanted to go work in the woods. I loved hunting, I loved fishing, so I was going to go be a forester at NC State. And so I went up there and met this sweet lady. Her name was Awada Hassan. She was the actual admissions counselor for NC State. And sweet little Arab woman, she was awesome. And she says, "I see your grades here, and you've done well at community college. You took science and calculus and all those other types of things." She said, "But I'm going to let you come to school here at State, and you can enter the summer program as a lifelong education." And essentially that's for old folks who want to take a college class. They let you go in there. She said, "You can take Calculus 2 and finite math, and if you do well in those, then I'll consider you for transfer in." And I said, "Okay." And it was pretty awesome, because you go up there, I stayed there on campus, and I went to, if you ever go to summer classes, you go to school all day, Monday, 8 to 5, and then you take a test on Friday. And so that worked for me. I stayed in it the whole time, and I actually made A's in both of those. I'm still proud of that. And Dr. Hassan comes back and she says, "All right, you're in." And so I had to start taking my entry-level forestry classes, and we went up through forestry school, and it was fabulous. And I graduated in 2000 in forestry. And I ended up, between my junior and senior year, I had a co-op job. And so essentially I worked in Bennett Rapids for that paper mill that was up there. And I was cruising timber. I was out in the woods. We were burning, site prep burning, all kinds of fun stuff. 4-wheelers and 4-wheel drive truck. I mean, we were getting paid to do this stuff. It was fabulous. And every one of my paychecks I got, and I was making full-time money, so I was making probably $40,000 for that 1 year, but every half of my paycheck went back to my dad to pay back my college money that I blew. And so I ended up graduating in 2000 with my sister, and we ended up, I came out, and with that work experience, I actually got considered for some of the best jobs for entry-level foresters. And I came to work with an appraiser in Bethel, which is right outside of town here as well. And so I came back to Greenville, and they sent me back to school to get my appraiser's license, and I had my North Carolina appraiser's license in North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and we were driving all over the state, appraising farms and cruising timber, measuring trees. And it was really awesome, because imagine down there in no man's land, Georgia, and when you do an appraisal, you may have heard of them, you got to get 3 comparable sales, and you go research the properties. And so you have to do property inspections, and so I'm riding out in the middle of a farm in the middle of nowhere, looking at this man's land or this lady's land that they just bought. And all of a sudden, when you round the corner, and there's the forester or the farmer that's sitting there, the landowner says, "What the hell are you doing on my property?" And you're like, you got to make a friend really quick. So I learned the power of relationships. So it was really finding the connection. So I'd look at him and say, "Man, I just noticed you bought this piece of property, and when you're talking to them, you want to understand what they paid for it and what they allocated." So I'm making a friend. I was like, "Man, I see you got a deal on this thing." He's like, "Oh yeah, I bought this from my cousin." And I was like, "Ooh, family transfer, that's a discount." So when I'm using this as a comparable sale, I have to put in all the discounts and the deals on it so that I can do and sign off on the appraisal. anyway, so you end up trying to figure out how to make a friend really fast out there. And that really started down my path of the power of relationships and being able to influence. And so I don't know if you guys remember, but back then around 2005, no, it was about 2005, the interest rates went to zero. And what happens with interest rates, when interest rates go to zero, everybody can go out there and afford to borrow money to buy land. So the value of land, when interest rates went to zero, went from like $700 an acre for bare timberland to about $1,000 an acre. And so we were actually going around and appraising these big timberland holdings, 80, 100,000 acres, and I was signing my name on $100 million appraisals. And these pension fund managers who were actually we were doing appraisal work for, they were riding these big bonuses when these values came up. So they'd ask me the next year, say, hey man, can you appraise this? This is higher and better use property. I said, there ain't no higher and better use property out here. I'm in the middle of Georgia. There's nothing out here. And he said, well, can't you put a Walmart? I said, there ain't no put no Walmart. I'm not signing my name to a $100 million appraisal. And so sure enough, that business started to fade away. And I realized I'm going to have to make a career path change. And so I called up my cousin Chad, who was working with a company called APAC, which is down in Kinston. And if you know, APAC was a competitor to Barnhill. And so Barnhill was from my old hometown back in Tarboro. I went to work for APAC as an estimator and a project manager. And I don't know if you guys remember, but Fire Tower Road used to be a 2-lane road between the community college all the way to the movie theater. And so my first project with them was to make it 4 lanes. And so I was out there and working with working with estimators and project managers. We bid on the job, and we actually that was my first project. It took me 2 years to build that, and I met so many crazy folks out there, great folks, hard-working people, that I learned a lot about society and all the folks that actually do contribute, and it was really awesome because I learned about how to put gas in the lines. I mean, from a guy who didn't even have a high school education, and these guys are smart and they're brilliant. And I worked with APAC, and then one day I got called into the office, and they said, we've got big news. And I went into the boardroom, and I looked down there, and it was the Barnhill crowd on one half of the room and the APAC crowd on the other half of the room. And again, these guys are competitors, just like Ford and Chevrolet. And so I walk in the room and I recognize all the Barnhill guys, and these are the guys I grew up with their kids. So I knew Alan and Lee Cooper was my Sunday school teacher, and Wes and all those guys in there. And everybody says, hey Bennett, what's up? And I was like, what's going on? It says Barnhill just bought APAC. And I was like, well damn, no, that's something. So all the APAC folks were scared to death that they were all losing their jobs. And imagine this is your biggest competitor in your back door. And I walk in the door and I'm like, hey Alan, hey Lee. And I look at, and they're like, you know them? I was like, yeah, I grew up with all of them. And after that, we opened up the books, we were showing them everything, and it was fantastic. But you could feel the tension in the boardroom when I walked in there that day. And so I ended up working for Barnhill for about and each one of these, the forestry job, 5 years. I went to work at APAC that turned into a Barnhill, that was 5 years. And so towards the end of my career at Barnhill, I was actually driving to Tarboro, and at this time I'm married and I've got small kids. I'm missing baseball games, and I realized pretty quickly my last name wasn't Barnhill, so I wasn't going to go into larger leadership roles, and it's tough being in the office at 6 o'clock in the morning and home at 7 o'clock at night. And so I convinced a guy over in IS, his name was Bruce Walker. Actually, my buddy Steven got my resume on his desk, because if you ever try to apply to a lot of these organizations, big organizations, they got all kinds of auto filters and stuff on their application process portal where you upload your resume. So if you don't meet some sort of algorithm, you're not even going to make it past the layers to even get to see somebody. And I realized that, and so my buddy Steven put my resume on Bruce's desk and says, this is a good guy. And he looked at it and he was like, holy crap, he don't have, this is interviewing for a data, they call it a data engineer job. So this is the people who write code that pull data out of electronic health records. And I said, I'm good with Excel. I know how to do a pivot table, and I know how to do some basic old FX functions that come up in the bar at the top. But the guy looked at me, he said, I'm hiring 3 people. I'm hiring Chitra Venkatesan, who was from Cary, and she could write SQL code. She could write, at that time we had business objects, which was crystal reports. We can do that. We had web focus. She could write all that code in her sleep. And then I had a guy, Blake, who was a super smart dude from Fidelity. He came down, a big database guy, super smart. This is crap I don't know anything about. And then they hired me. And so I'm sitting in there and I go to work and they give me 3 little reports, the code behind it, and I start reading the code and I figure out, and the first test was, here, make this report work for Vidant Edgecombe Hospital. And really, you just read down through the code and it says, oh, where service area ID equals 901, that must be Vidant Medical Center. I bet if I change it to 601 or something, it'll be for another hospital. Sure enough, there it was. And so I started playing around and asking questions, and Chitra was still one of my best friends right now. She came down from Cary, and I made a deal with her early on. I said, Chitra, if you teach me how to write code, I'll trade you for weekend excursions in eastern North Carolina. And she says, oh, very good, I'll do that. And I was like, and so I came back, and I'd go sit in her office, and I'd say, Chitra, I am stuck on this. And she'd pull up my code, and she'd say, very good. I said, what do you mean very good? She said, it is fixed. I said, it's fixed? How'd you do it? She said, and I was like, oh, that's genius. And then she said, what am I doing this weekend? I said, all right, this weekend, you're going to go down. I said, you're going to bring the kids and you're going to go down to Aurora. They got a big phosphate plant down there. Anyways, they put this big pile of dirt downtown. Kids are going to dig for fossils. They're going to love it. They're going to find shark's teeth. And then you're going to hop on the ferry and you're going to take the ferry over to Bath. And then you're going to eat at Blackbeard's Pizza right there on the water. And then you're going to be home by 3 o'clock. It's going to be the best weekend. She says, comes back the next Monday. She says, I cannot believe you drive your car on the boat. And I said, yeah, you drive your car on the boat. It's awesome. And so we still have that relationship that we do now. And I can call her anytime. And she's awesome. And so when our team was growing, and my supervisor, Bruce, he left. And he went to work up there at CHOP, which is Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. And they had a vacancy there, and the guy who was the interim director, I told Danny, I said, Danny, I want to apply for the supervisor role on our team. He says, well, I can hire for it. I said, he said, submit your resume. I said, I think I'm going to wait and see who my new boss is going to be before I do that. He says, all right, that's fine. And so they hired a new person who would be my boss. And so she came around to my desk and says, what do you want to be when you grow up, kind of stuff. I said, actually, I want to be the supervisor on our team. And she said, okay. And so that was on like a Monday. And so that Friday, I came by her office. I said, hey, Don, I'm getting ready to submit my resume for supervisor on our team. And she says, don't bother. I said, what do you mean don't bother? She says, you're a people person like me. I need somebody who's a little more techie in that role. I said, oh, okay. And so at the same time, I had been working with Kim Crittmore, who's the vice president of Children's Hospital right now. At that time, she was the vice president of operations. And if you ever go down to the hospital, the operations center is a room about this big that has jumbotrons everywhere, and you can manage hospital volume across all of our system hospitals. Well, before all that, we had one little jumbotron. I'd been working with her and on giving her data. At that time, she was doing hospital operations, case management, and diabetes populations. And she called me about a week before that. She said, Bennett, I got a business manager job that you'd be perfect for. And I said, Kim, I ain't interested in that. I said, I love my job over here. I get to meet people. Well, anyways, when after I met with Donna Cornwall, and she said that, and I shouldn't say her name, but anyway, yeah. I met with Donna, and Donna said, don't bother. I called Kim up. I said, hey, you still looking for a business manager? She said, yeah, I'm looking for a business manager. And I sent her my resume, and she looked at my resume. She says, Bennett, you don't have a master's degree. I said, no, I don't have a master's degree. She said, well, this job requires a master's degree. I was like, well, damn. She said, however, she said, if you sign a contract that says you'll go get your master's degree and we'll pay for half of it, will you do it? I said, yeah, I'll do it. And so that's what I did, and I started the online program here, and it was fantastic. Absolutely. I'd encourage you, if you get the opportunity, to pursue your master's here. It makes a big difference, especially coming out of school, because they are, like you said, you just saw it, there's an artificial wall that nobody talks about, but if they make it master's degree required to go up to certain levels, I'd encourage you to do that. And ECU now makes it easy that you can pick up a few more classes and you do it. I had to take the whole dang curriculum because I was so old coming out of state that, and this is funny because I can't even remember the name of the test you have to take, the MCATs or whatever it is, but I had to take that test. And when I took the test, I scored so low on the test that ECU had to use my score, and they had to take the average of my GPA from NC State. And literally, when I joined graduate school, I was on academic probation right out of the get-go. And so it was really awesome. But I enjoyed my MBA experience because it was fantastic, and I learned. And this is another trick, and also the power of relationships. You know, when Blackboard comes up and they put the first discussion board up there and it says, "Tell us about yourself." Well, I'm remarried and I have 6 kids, and so we have a huge family, and so I have my little bio up on a Word document with my picture, and whenever that discussion board pops up on Blackboard, first thing I do is I go copy and paste it, and I put my picture there, and I wait and watch. And every time is when it's time for group work, and I go back to that first discussion board of the bios, and whoever your top 5 people are, your first 5 people, are your people that you want in your group whenever you have to do group work. And so that's a great little tip and trick to take with you, because everybody who's the top 5 posters or the first 5 posters on the bio boards are generally the people you want in your group when you have to do group projects. And so I lived and died by that creed, and it took me throughout my whole career, and we had such a good time in the College of Business. But anyways, I finished my, and this is funny, I finished my master's degree in 2016, and the whole time I've been working with Kim, and we started doing all kinds of cool stuff because I got to keep my keys. I had enough that I could still pull data, but I wasn't having to do it for everybody. I was doing it for my service line. And Kim taught me the business of how to run a hospital. And so with most clinicians over there, clinical people are very smart. They know how to run a business, but they just need the data to back it up. Well, I bring the data, and the data was my olive branch, and that got me to the meetings. And they would all go around the table, and I'd show them some data up there, and it'd be a graph of some sort, and the trend line's going this way. And they'd always ask me, they'd say, they'd go around the table and says, I think it's this, we can fix it by this. And they get around to the old IS guy and they say, what do you think, Bennett? I said, I don't know anything about hospital operations, but I know that those things that you did right there, it makes the line go down. So if you stop doing those things and start doing this stuff, it makes the line go up. And they're like, that's brilliant. You want to come to the next meeting? And I'm like, sure, I'll come to the next meeting. And so that's how data was always my olive branch that I always brought to the table. And it's not necessarily olive branch because you could posterize somebody's performance up there and really burn them. And so I learned very early that data is powerful, and you can use it for good or you can use it for not good. But after you start burning 1 or 2 bridges, after you take a nurse and you figure out a problem that you solved with your data, now you're tracking and trending something that the healthcare system's never seen before, and you posterize it up there, and it actually, the outcomes, the CEO Mike looks at it and says, this is great. Children's Hospital looks terrible, and then turns right around to Kim and says, what are you doing about Children's Hospital? Kim's pulling me aside and says, why did you freaking put me up like that, man? You set me up and look bad in front of everybody. And so I realized that whenever you have data or information, you bring it to your people first that may cast them in a good light or bad light, so that not only does she not see it for the first time, she's seen it, so that if Children's Hospital does look bad and Mike Waldron looks around and says, Kim, what are you doing about Children's Hospital? She says, yes, we talked about that, and we're going to be doing this, and this. And she's already got a plan set up to where she can answer that question. And it became such a powerful piece that everybody started inviting me to meetings and doing those types of things. And Kim and I worked together for about 7 years, and we went from operations to our medicine service line, and then we went over to women's and children's. And then recently, And so you notice now that I'm about 10 years into operations, I still have my data itch. And so I had an opportunity to come to work with the population health team, which is really where the future of healthcare is going, because a fee-for-service world, which is when you come into the hospital, we do a bunch of stuff to you and the hospital gets reimbursed for it. Payers aren't paying for that anymore. Now they're paying for what your outcomes are. Did you get better? Did you not get better? And the work that I've been able to do, it started with our COVID work, and this is funny. It's a fun little story. So I'm sitting in there, and a long time ago, we did a proof of concept with the Pitt County GIS department over here, because they wanted to see where all of our ED familiar faces and hospital readmissions were. That's a big cost on the healthcare system. And so I did a proof of concept because I wanted to do a heat map. Because back in my old forestry days, I used to use this software called ArcGIS, which is dots, polygons, and lines with data behind it. I didn't have the software, but I knew the GIS department did. We did a proof of concept, did that heat map for ED familiar faces and readmissions. And Brian Floyd looked at it and said, "This is fabulous." Bought the software, and we kept it for about 2 years, and then they put it on the shelf and never used it. Well, fast forward to the COVID pandemic. I'm sitting there in my office, and Todd Hickey, our chief strategy officer, calls me up. He says, "Bennett, you remember that old software you used to have for mapping?" I said, "Man, I ain't seen that in years." He said, "Well, we're working on we've got a COVID task force stood up, because when COVID first hit, nursing homes and assisted living facilities were your most at-risk places for people dying. And we had partnered with about 20 or 30 of them here in Eastern North Carolina. These are mom and pop type nursing homes. I mean, they're not affiliated with anybody. They don't have all kinds of resources. And back in those days, you couldn't get hand sanitizer. Not out in Bertie County or a Hosky or somewhere. You couldn't get gowns, any of those things. And so we partnered with these nursing homes and skilled nursing facilities. And Todd called me up. He said, "I want to map these places in relation to where our clinics are and our hospitals, and so that we can kind of get a picture of what we're dealing with." And so I call him back. I said, "Todd," I said, "if I get my hands on that lab data of the COVID positive patients that are coming through getting tested, I can start mapping all of our COVID positive patients, and hell, I can start predicting spread across Eastern North Carolina." He's like, "Damn, that's what I'm trying to do." I said, "Well, give me about 30 minutes. And so I called my buddies over in IS. I said, "You guys know where ArcGIS is?" I said, "Yeah, we ain't gonna have a license activated for it." I said, "Well, go ahead and activate it." And he went ahead, turned it on. They put it on my computer. It literally crashed my computer because it was so big. So they pulled it back off, and they turned it on, and they installed it virtually on a server and cranked it up to like 32 gigs of RAM or something, and it was fast, and I was remoting it, and I started mapping all the COVID positive patients coming through our health system. And I don't know if you remember, but we were doing just about all the COVID testing for everybody east of I-95. We invested about $5 million in our lab so that we can run like 5,000 tests at a time. And so I was getting all that COVID lab data, and I started mapping all the COVID positive patients. And I'm sitting there in front of boardrooms now. Mike Walden's calling me in there, and he's like, "What's going on?" And so we're showing them where COVID spreads happen. And I still saved the email from Duplin County where I sent the guy, Chuck Daniker, who was running the southern region, and he had an outbreak. But our first big outbreak was down there in Duplin County, and it started in that little meat packing plant. But one thing I started drawing really strong inferences to was social vulnerability index from the CDC, and I had that mapped by census tract. And so I had all this color-coded map. Duplin County was all red, man, and so it had a few breakouts, and then all of a sudden it blew up right along social vulnerability index. And so now I started proving how social determinants of health are such a predictor of a clinical outcome. And it really became awesome because Mike called me up in a boardroom one day, and he said, "You see that pink dot up there? I know for a fact there's 2 dots that are there." And I said, "Yep, Mike, I do know. That is the 2 cardiac surgeons, and it's a husband and wife team, and those 2 dots are perfectly on top of each other." And he said, "Well, can't you make the dot bigger or something?" I said, "Mike, I learned this software back in 2000, man. Now I'm trying to figure it out." And sit here and report daily to you what's going on. He said, well, can I get you some help? I said, hell yeah, you can get me some help. And so the next day he had lunch with Ron Mitchelson, who at the time was the interim dean over here at ECU. Well, him and Ron are doing lunch, and he looks over, and Ron came from the Department of Geography, if you remember. And so he asked Ron, he said, look, I got a guy over here that's got ArcGIS. And he said, Ron about falls out of his seat. He says, what the hell are y'all doing with ArcGIS at the hospital? He says, I don't know, but we got it. And we're mapping all the COVID positive patients. And he was like, holy crap. And so literally a meeting pops up on my calendar on Monday. And I go into that meeting, and it's the department chair of Health Information Technology, Bioethics, Geography, Public Health. Ron's there. I got the whole C-suite over at Vidant, and they both look at us. Ron and Mike look at everybody, says, I don't care who gets the credit for it. Y'all just sit down and figure this thing out about how we can map COVID, how we can distribute vaccine when that comes out. And I was literally sitting in that Friday with the department chair for all these folks, and I'm just old Bennett here with a pile of data in my back pocket. And it became so awesome because if you think about it, these departments traditionally had competed with each other. And so that's how research world is. I mean, you have, if at the end of the day, Ron at the time has a big piece of pie, and you have to allocate money to different departments, and a lot of it's based on research. Well, when you put all that stuff aside and everybody tries to solve the common problem, it was awesome because I said, I need a server. And our research got pulled in to that COVID CARES Act money. ECU, I think, got like $1.5 million for COVID. Our research got pulled into that. And so I call up Todd Hickey one day and I say, hey, Todd, I said, I need you to generate me an invoice for $300,000 because ECU's going to send us a check. And he was like, well, what are you talking about? I said, don't worry about it. Just generate me an invoice and we're going to get us a check over there. And that's kind of how all these things really blossomed up. It really came out of a collaborative space where it was fun to work with. Everybody brought expertise to the table, but the vibe was right. There was no competition, and we did a lot of really, really fun stuff with and cool stuff with COVID. And I don't know if you guys remember, but when and I've never published papers or any of that stuff before, but I don't know if you remember, but when the state released its nursing home death data and performance data, I grabbed it, the first thing I did, and I looked at our facilities we managed and compared them to the rest of the state, and we ended up publishing that research with the Department of Public Health, where our nursing homes had fewer deaths, fewer duration of outbreak, and they had fewer hospitalizations compared to the rest of the state. And so we're doing really great work out here, and it's really awesome when you can collect. But I didn't know how to publish that. But I called my buddy Greg Kearney over in Department of Public Health, and I said, I think we've got a paper we can publish here. And he did all the legwork, and because I don't know how to do that stuff. But I know how to write up what the data was and what our problem was we were trying to solve, and it's just 2 paragraphs. And now I'm like an author on 6 different research papers, but I'm still the same old country guy from Tarboro who didn't go to school for this. So you don't go to school for this stuff. You don't go to school for any of this stuff, man. You really go, you go to network in events like this and build out your network. I'm a huge LinkedIn guy. You'll see me on LinkedIn a lot. I'd encourage you guys to go connect with me. But one of the things that, instead of telling my crazy story, and I know I'll probably run out of time, but I wanted to give you guys some tools for building relationships. And I've been in a part of a couple of leaders, and in fact, I've got a pile of them. I don't know how long they'll go. I'll take them and pass them around. I was in some leadership work, and I don't know who she is. And if that don't work, then we'll look at the, in fact, give me one of those so I can talk through. But everybody talks about your relationships and your network, and you think of it as this big, hairy, audacious kind of thing that sits out here that you want to get it, but you don't know how to get it. And it's not that complicated. It really is as simple as being a friendly person and winning people to your way of thinking. It's all about building, each relationship is one at a time. And not all relationships are going to blossom into something great. But at the same time, it takes a lot of work on your end. I don't know everything that goes on in that hospital, but I got a lot of friends who know a lot about what goes on in those hospitals. And so many times people call me up and says, Bennett, do you know how to, do you know anybody in plant ops who may be able to help fix the toilet or something? And so, yeah, his name's Lowell Spate, and he's one of my buddies. He went to NC State. We talk about NC State stuff when we get together. But we ended up, I put people together that are from my network, and I either ask the question on behalf of the person asking me, and I go find out the answer for them, and I bring it back to them, or I just put them together. But it really does start with your relationships are one person at a time. And so I'd like to kind of go through the list about being a friendlier person, because Dale Carnegie, if you guys ever do when Mr. May was talking about reading books, How to Win Friends and Influence People is a book that you probably heard about or talked about. That is a very powerful book, and I would encourage you. It was written by Dale Carnegie back in like the 50s, and so some of the stories are still are not nowhere near as relevant as what today is, and you can buy newer versions of that may have more newer stories. But the power of storytelling, but How to Win Friends and Influence People is a fantastic book that will take you throughout your whole career, because the whole basis is rooted in how to build relationships. Because once you build relationships, now you've built the power to be able to influence, and with that becomes the capabilities to be able to lead people. So start back at the basics. Don't criticize or condemn or complain. Nobody freaking likes a Debbie Downer or a Donnie Downer in the middle of a meeting. Nobody likes that crap. No, and so don't get sucked into the victim mentality. I always say, don't play the victim card, because whenever you come to an argument and you say, I can't do so-and-so because of something, 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 it gets you by the first time, but when you play the victim card the second time and the third time, it doesn't hold any water anymore. And somebody does something for you. If you play the victim card, they do it for you the first time. But after the second time, you won't be invited to the meetings, or the third and the fourth time. So I like to talk about not criticizing, condemning, or complaining or feeling sorry for yourself. Don't do that, because nobody wants to hear it. Y'all don't like to hear it from other people. So I'd encourage you to not do that. But give honest and sincere appreciation. Oh my gosh, man. Thank yous go forever. And it's really important. And he talks about sincere appreciation. Sincere is not just a thank you or a thumbs up on an emoji or any of those things. It really is the power of a thank you card. Spend 15 or $20 and get you some stationery that's got your name on it. And when somebody does something right, write you a thank you card, man. It only takes 5 lines to write it down. But it's such a powerful tool. If you go into people's offices, many times you'll see it's almost like they're trophy cased of cards. Be a trophy case for somebody, because they're going to look at your name that's on your thank you note, and they're going to remember every time that Bennett's a nice guy. And that's all that you need. And so I'd encourage you to get thank you cards, because they still are very powerful. Arouse in the other person an eager want. This is, when you read that, it's like, man, that's kind of weird, but it's not. It's really about getting somebody fired up in a conversation. When you talk to them, talk about some of the things you do, get them excited, get a want out of them, inspire an eager want. Become genuinely interested in the other person. That's easy. Listen, get interested in what they're doing. When I'm having a conversation about ArcGIS and I'm fired up, ask the question, what's ArcGIS? How can I use it? Get somebody excited. It works every time. Number 5, smile. God dog it, man. That doesn't take any effort. Simple smile, man. It makes all the difference in the world. Remember, this is one of my favorites, number 6. Remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound of any language. How many times have you been sitting in a meeting and somebody talking about you, or how many times have I said, Seth, you did a great job today, or Aaron, you did a great job today? The name, when somebody hears their name in a meeting, how many times, if you have a professor that's talking to you, or how many times have you called out a student's name? You see the smile, you see it. It is the sweetest words. And so whenever you're in a meetings or if you're talking to people, even emails, go ahead and say, hi, whatever, Jeff, thank you for so-and-so. Use their names because it is the sweetest sound on their ears. Be a good listener and encourage others to talk about themselves. Talk in terms of the other person's interest. So when you talk about, don't always talk about ArcGIS, talk about what's interesting to those folks so that you can build the conversation. Make the person feel important and do it sincerely. All these things to be a friendly person take proactive work and proactive thinking. A lot of people say, I'm not wired that way. And a lot of people aren't wired that way. But I think once you come back to these and revisit it, being a friendly person is not only going to help you in the workforce, it's going to help you in your social life, it's going to help you everywhere else. Because again, nobody wants to hang around with somebody who's a Debbie Downer or a Donnie Downer. We all know that. So as we win people to our way of thinking, now we're starting to talk about influencing. The only way to get the best out of an argument is to avoid it. How many times do we power up with emails and text and ammunition on how to prove our way of getting something out of an argument? What happens at the end of an argument? Two people pissed off at each other, and one person's got to do something that they didn't want to do and got into it. The best way to get the best out of an argument is to avoid it. So I was going to say there's so much wasted energy in an argument. If you have a disagreement, come to the table as a friendly person and then find out where your commonalities are and start, because you're not going to be graded on how well you win the argument. You're going to be graded on did you deliver a solution or not. And I got a funny story about that too. The part of the work that I'm doing right now as far as standing up a brand new software application that's really complicated, we're working with a company called Lightbeam, and I had two project managers on Lightbeam that quit, and I had a program manager on our team that now is no longer there. But I went snow skiing with the family. I came into this role and I said, all right, I got two project manager teams. They're going to stand this software up. I'm going to have 6 months to be able to get everybody access. And I came back from a snow skiing trip with the family to see the second project manager from Lightbeam quit. Our program manager sitting there with a pile of emails pointing the fingers at Lightbeam as why the project's failing. I got another guy at Lightbeam with a pile of emails pointing the finger at us why the problem. And so I look over and Mike's typing up his third email. I said, Mike, what are you doing? He says, I'm sending another email to tell him that. I was like, stop, pick up the phone and call them. He said, no, I'm sending them an email so I'll have a record of what they did. I said, just pick up the phone and call them. He's like, I'm not, I'm going to have it. And I said, Mike, I said, at the end of the day, you're going to have a pile of emails pointing the finger at Lightbeam that they're the problem. Lightbeam's got a pile of emails pointing to you that that's the problem. At the end of the day, we still ain't got no software. And that's all that people care about, whether the software is up or the software is down. So don't try to win an argument, man, because it's such a waste of energy. And at the end of the day, you're not going to be viewed as a good leader because you won an argument. You're going to be viewed at how well you delivered a solution. Show respect for the other person's opinion. Never say you're wrong. Nobody wants to be hurt. And if you are wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. Always admit that you're wrong if you're wrong. Don't try to argue your way out of it. Sometimes it's in your best interest if you're trying to preserve the relationship just to go ahead and admit if you're wrong and let them find out that you were right the whole time, a couple of days later. Because they will respect you more that you didn't call them out that you were wrong during the heat of the argument and let them find it out and know that you're still there as a willing participant to engage in what the solution is going to be. Begin everything in a friendly way. We opened up this conversation today talking about friendly stuff, smiling, having fun. It makes a big difference. Get the other person saying yes, yes, immediately. Let the other person do a great deal of the talking. Let the other person feel that the idea is his or hers. And try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. Be sympathetic with the other person's ideas or desires. Appeal to nobler motives. I wanted to explain that. Appealing to nobler motives is a mission-driven kind of talk there. And so everybody sees a mission statement. You've heard about it in your classes. It's important to have a mission statement. The reason why mission statements are important is because it gives everybody a common goal. And then if you can recite your mission statement, it's not hokey. It really is a way of putting everybody together. And a lot of times, especially in clinical meetings, when I can sit down at the in the middle of the meeting and there's this big argument and tensions going on, and I look around and I say, where's the patient in any of this discussion? Because at the end of the day, we're all there for the patient. And if that can't happen, that becomes really powerful coming from the non-clinical guy too. But again, keep this. I'll make sure I'm going to start getting, I wanted to give some time for some questions or insights too. I don't want to sit here and lecture you guys on a bunch of bullet points. We can take those away. But I wanted you guys to have some time to be able to have some questions. I'm hope to be one of the most approachable guys you'll meet. So yes.
Yeah, I got a question for you, Bennett. First of all, thank you. I really appreciate it. What do you do to stay in touch and maintain relationships over the course of a very long career? Maybe with people you don't work with directly anymore. How do you maintain a relationship in a time of clash?
So your network requires a lot of work, and it's whether it's touching base with people or keeping up with it. But my best answer for that, because you can't be everything to everybody all the time, never leave a relationship on a bad note. Just like Chitra, I'm coming back to her 10 years later, and it's like we've never quit working together from day one. You have to stay true to yourself, just like Dr. May said. Stay true to yourself, stay to your core, and always show up as the same person every time that's positive and happy. And not only will you get invited to the meetings, but you won't have to worry about keeping the relationship up, because the relationship will sustain over time. And when it's ready to re-engage, it's right there, just like you never left it. Any other questions?
This is just kind of like personal. I mean, because I'm from a hospital, I don't hear a lot of people name dropping a lot. So, I mean, what exactly, just kind of curious, just kind of personally.
Yeah.
What were some like glaring, if you can say them, what were some glaring issues, like during COVID and all that, or just in general?
It's lack of access to resources. There's nothing in a hospital. There's only one like Dollar General, and so they've been out of hand sanitizer for the last 6 months, and so you're not going to get hand sanitizer out there. I grew up in these small towns, so yeah, it's pretty amazing that it's a different dynamic out there, but at the same time, they're good folks and they're smart people. They live out there for a reason, and so everybody you have an opportunity to learn something from. I encourage you to take advantage of it. And it starts with those, when you build a relationship, is how you bring yourself to the relationship. I could talk all day, I know. Sorry.
No, you're fine. And I just want to really encourage you guys to stay around at the leadership conference and to join us at the receptions. And then there's another opportunity to engage and learn more. Please attend that. Please stay for the networking reception. And Bennett, will you be at that?
Absolutely. And
so there will be a great opportunity for you to talk to Bennett and engage him and find out all the things that he has learned over his very expansive career in a lot of different places, building a very good network on how to build relationships. So join me in thanking Bennett for being here.